The Young and the Restless spoilers Saturday's full September 20th, 2025. Mariah Copeland had always been the steady presence for Tessa Porter, the anchor who understood her pain before she could even articulate it. But the burden of caregiving, of keeping strength alive when her own reserves had been depleted, had begun to wear on her. In a moment of quiet desperation, she reached out to Daniel Romalotti, not because she didn't trust herself, but because she needed another set of shoulders strong enough to carry the weight. Daniel had been through storms of his own, rebuilding his life after years of chaos, and Mariah sensed in him a kind of resilience that Tessa needed now. It wasn't about romance, not about replacing one bond with another, but about weaving together a safety net so that Tessa would never feel abandoned in her darkest hours. Daniel, moved by the request, agreed without hesitation, and in that decision he stepped into a new role that would test his loyalty, his compassion, and his ability to be the quiet hero behind the scenes. It was a gesture that seemed small in the grand tapestry of Genoa City drama, yet it carried ripple effects that would be felt for longer than anyone anticipated. At the same time, Jack Abbott was confronting battles of his own, battles that stretched beyond the boardroom of Jabbett and into the very survival of his family legacy. For decades, Jack had played chess against Victor Newman, sometimes winning, often losing, but always returning to the board with a new strategy. This time, however, the stakes felt different. The shifting alliances, the corporate threats, and the fractures within his own family made him realize that he could no longer rely solely on the old ways. In an unexpected twist of fate, Jack found himself turning not to his usual circle, but to Victoria Newman. On the surface, it seemed absurd in Abbott seeking help from a Newman, but desperation has a way of erasing old grudges. Jack knew that Victoria was sharp, ruthless, and capable of maneuvering in ways that even he admired. By appealing to her, he was not just looking for an ally, he was acknowledging that survival sometimes meant reaching across the battlefield to shake hands with a former rival. Victoria, as always, saw the advantage in aligning herself with Jack, and though her motives were never entirely pure, the spark of this new alliance promised to reshape the power dynamics of Genoa City in ways no one could predict. And then there was Lily Winters, caught once again in the pull of a love story that had long since fractured beyond repair. She had built walls around her heart after the endless betrayals, the disappointments, and the slow erosion of trust, yet the shadow of Kane Ashby always lingered, a ghost she could not entirely banish. That evening, Lily entered Crimson Lights, seeking nothing more than a few moments of peace, a familiar corner where she could breathe without the constant weight of expectation pressing down on her. Esther Valentine, ever intuitive, looked at her with knowing eyes and guessed her order before Lily even spoke, a small kindness that reminded Lily how much of her life had become visible to others. But just as she settled into the comfort of routine, she felt the shift in the air, the unmistakable presence of Kane standing behind her. He guessed her tea order too, the familiarity in his voice both soothing and jarring, a reminder of the man he used to be, the man she had once trusted more than anyone else. The conversation that followed was inevitable, a collision of unresolved emotions and hard truths. Kane asked about the children, his tone heavy with guilt, and Lily confirmed what he already knew, that they were hurting, caught in the undertow of choices neither parent could undo. They sat down, their drinks untouched, the air between them thick with history. Lily's eyes bore into him as she demanded to know why he was there, whether he had truly abandoned his schemes or whether this was just another ploy to worm his way back into her good graces. Kane, ever the smooth talker, denied any duplicity, swearing that his intentions were pure, but Lily had heard it all before. For a fleeting moment, she admitted, she saw a glimmer of the man she once loved, a brief flicker of the past that almost tricked her into believing in him again. But the illusion shattered quickly, replaced by the sobering truth that the man she remembered no longer existed. Kane, refusing to give up, leaned into the desperation of his love, declaring that they were meant for each other, that destiny itself had bound them together. His voice cracked with the sincerity of someone who believed his own words, who longed to turn back the clock to a time before betrayal had poisoned everything. But Lily's response was firm, final, and devastating. She told him that no matter what he said, no matter how much he pleaded, the truth was unchangeable. They could never go back. The love they once shared was gone, burned away by years of mistrust, and the couple they used to be had ceased to exist. Her words cut through the air with a quiet finality, the kind that leaves no room for negotiation. Kane's face betrayed the ache of a man watching his last hope slip through his fingers, but Lily did not waver. She told him that the sooner he accepted reality, the better it would be for all of them, especially the children who deserve stability rather than the endless cycle of false promises. What made the moment all the more painful was the undercurrent of longing that still existed between them. Both could feel it, the echo of a connection that had once defined their lives. But love, Lily realized, was not enough when trust had been broken beyond repair. She was no longer the woman willing to overlook Kane's flaws, no longer the partner who would carry the burden of his mistakes. She was stronger now, more resolute, and though her heart ached, she chose to put an end to the cycle rather than remain trapped in it. The tea before her had gone cold and touched, a quiet metaphor for the love that had once warmed her but now sat lifeless and undrinkable. In the days that followed, each of these stories would weave into the larger fabric of Genoa City's fragile alliance of Jack and Victoria, the quiet heroism of Daniel stepping up for Tessa, and the heartbreaking severance between Lily and Kane. Together they painted a portrait of a town forever in motion, where love and betrayal, power and vulnerability, loyalty and ambition collided endlessly, reshaping lives in ways no one could ever fully predict. The beauty and the tragedy of it all lay in the fact that every choice carried weight. Every word spoken in pain or hope had the potential to spark a chain of consequences that would ripple far beyond the moment. For Lily, for Jack, for Mariah, and for all the others caught in the storm, the path forward would not be easy, but it would be theirs to claim, one decision at a time. The observation deck had always been a place of quiet reflection, a space where the world seemed to slow down just enough for hearts burdened with secrets to release what they could no longer hold inside. When Daniel Romalotti found Mariah there, leaning against the railing, the distant city lights shimmering like 1,000 untold confessions, he knew instinctively that something was weighing heavily on her. He greeted her gently, asking after her health, but the smile she forced could not mask the turmoil beneath. Mariah shrugged it off, insisting she was nothing more than a nuisance, someone who complicated life for others without meaning to. Daniel shook his head, his tone firm but kind, reminding her that carrying everything alone only made the weight heavier. He urged her to open up to Tessa, to stop shielding her from the truth out of fear, but Mariah bristled, her voice quiet yet sharp. She admitted that honesty would overwhelm Tessa, that some truths were better left unspoken, and that protecting her from the darkest corners of reality was an act of love. Daniel, however, would not let the words settle. He told her that what Tessa did not know was in fact hurting her, that the silence created wounds just as deep as spoken pain. And in his eyes Mariah saw not judgment but a mirror reflecting her own doubts. When Mariah turned the conversation toward Tessa and their daughter Arya, her tone softened with a mix of longing and guilt. Daniel reassured her, telling her that aside from the ache of missing her, they were doing fine, navigating the rhythms of everyday life with resilience. But then, curiosity overtook him. Why had she reached out to him of all people? Mariah's answer was laced with vulnerability, admitting that in her eyes he might very well be the best friend Tessa had at the moment, the one she trusted enough to hold her world steady when she herself could not. The confession carried a weight Daniel did not take lightly. He realized then that Mariah was preparing for something larger, something that went beyond this conversation, and the truth soon followed. She told him she would be leaving town for a while, a decision that brought immediate tension into the air. She needed him to step in, to watch over Tessa and Arya in her absence, to be the guardian of her family when she could not be present. The request cracked something open in Daniel. He thought of Cassie, of her wisdom, and the way she had once guided those she loved through storms they believed they could never survive. For a brief moment, he imagined what Cassie might say to Mariah now, how she would remind her that forgiveness always outweighs fear, that love is stronger when it is shared rather than hidden. He voiced this thought aloud, his words trembling as he promised that whatever Mariah had done, whatever guilt she carried, Cassie would forgive her. That truth, he believed, was eternal. Mariah's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her heart torn between relief and anguish, and when Daniel vowed he would take care of Tessa and Arya as if they were his own, she reached out and embraced him. The hug was not one of romance, but of solidarity, of two souls recognizing that in a world as fragile as theirs, sometimes friendship was the only force strong enough to keep families whole. Meanwhile, at the Abbott estate, a very different kind of storm was brewing. Diane Jenkins, pacing restlessly, confessed to Jack Abbott that she could not shake the guilt pressing down on her when it came to Sally Spectra. Sally had been caught in the crossfire of ambitions to vast and grudges to deep, and Diane felt complicit in a system that allowed her pain to deepen. Jack, however, was not in the mood for sympathy. His words were sharp, laced with the frustration of a man watching his family circle the drain. Billy, he declared, should have known better. Yet he had blinded himself with obsession, driven by a singular need to reclaim Chancellor as though doing so could erase the failures of his past. That obsession had left him reckless, exposed, and Jack could see the disaster looming ahead. Worse still, if Kane managed to exploit Billy's desperation, using it as a weapon to mount an attack against Newman Enterprises, then no one in Genoa City would be safe from the fallout. The danger was not contained to business. It threatened to consume every relationship, every alliance, every fragile balance of power that still held the city together. Diane listened, her face etched with worry, before stepping closer, her voice soft yet urgent. She reminded Jack that they could not allow Billy to drown, no matter how recklessly he had chosen to dive into the storm. Too much was at stake: families, legacies, lives entwined in ways none of them could fully entangle. But Jack's response was grim, his metaphor as biting as it was true. Billy, he said, was in a gambler's mood, a man who would not step away from the table no matter how many losing hands were dealt. He would stay until the bitter end, until there was nothing left to wager, because in his mind the next card might always be the one that changed his fate. That kind of thinking, Jack warned, was dangerous not only for Billy but for everyone tethered to him. Diane, undeterred, pressed harder. She told Jack that he could not stand by and watch it happen, that he had to intervene, because if he failed to try, regret would haunt him long after the chips had fallen. She looked into his eyes, willing him to see that the fight was not just about Billy's choices but about preserving the very foundation of their family. The two conversations, Mario with Daniel and Diane with Jack, unfolded worlds apart yet mirrored one another in their essence. Both were about protection, about carrying the weight of those they loved even when it felt unbearable. Maria was entrusting her family to a friend because she feared her own strength was no longer enough, while Diane was demanding that Jack intervene before Billy's recklessness destroyed everything. Each character was caught between love and fear, guilt and hope, and each knew that choices made in these moments would ripple outward, reshaping futures that were already fragile. Genoa City thrived on these crossroads, on the tension between secrecy and revelation, between selfishness and sacrifice, and in both storylines, the stakes were higher than anyone dared admit aloud. For Maria, the question remained whether her departure would truly protect Tess or simply leave her more vulnerable. For Daniel, the responsibility he accepted was not just a promise but a transformation of his own role in the lives of those around him. For Jack, the decision to heed Diane's plea or ignore it would determine whether Billy's spiral dragged them all into ruin. And for Diane, the hope that her words might spark action was all she could cling to. In the quiet corners of Crimson Lights, on the open deck where Maria unburdened herself, and in the grand halls of the Abbott estate, lives were shifting, choices were crystallizing, and the wheels of destiny were turning once more, ensuring that nothing in Genoa City would ever remain still. Jack Abbott had spent so many years carrying the weight of his family's name that sometimes he forgot where the line between duty and desperation began. Diane's words still lingered in his ears, the plea that he intervene before Billy's recklessness drowned them all, and though Jack had wanted to dismiss it as yet another round of enabling, he knew she was right. He had failed Billy too many times before, turning a blind eye to his brother's self-destructive streak, convincing himself that the spiral would burn out on its own. But this time was different. This time Billy was dabbling in something far more dangerous than vices or impulsive romances. He was playing with Kane Ashby's fire, a scheme wrapped in AI technology that could devastate not only Jabbett but Newman Enterprises and everyone tied to them. Jack could not fight this battle alone, and so he made a decision that once would have seemed unthinkable would reach across enemy lines to Victoria Newman. When he found her at the club, her posture cool and guarded as always, he wasted no time. He told her about Kane's AI software, about the whispers he had pieced together, and about Billy's collaboration with a man who thrived on exploiting weakness. He expected shock, some flicker of surprise, but Victoria's eyes barely flickered. Instead, there was a measured calm, the look of a woman who had seen far more than anyone gave her credit for. Jack realized then that she had known, or at least suspected, and rather than comfort him, the revelation unsettled him even more. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit confines of his home, Billy Abbott paced like a man possessed. His phone glowed in his hand, each second of waiting stretching into an eternity. He muttered under his breath, words tumbling out like fragments of a manic sermon. "Come on, Kane, enough with the waiting, enough with the promises. This is it, this is the moment. This is when life begins for me." His voice grew louder, conviction hardening into delusion as he poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid fire. "You're going to the top, Billy Boy, right where you've always belonged. They never believed in you, but you'll show them. You'll show every single one of them that you were always the sharpest, the one they underestimated." He raised the glass in a mock toast to his own reflection, a man so enthralled by the vision of glory that he no longer saw the abyss yawning beneath his feet. It was in that feverish state that the knock came, and when the door opened to reveal Jack and Victoria, Billy's eyes widened not with surprise but with suspicion. He demanded to know why they were there, his voice sharp, defensive, already convinced of betrayal. Jack stepped forward, his voice low and firm, and uttered the words that sliced through the tension like a blade. "2 letters, Billy. I." For a moment, the room fell silent except for the clink of Billy's glass as he set it down too hard. He asked how Jack could possibly know, how his brother had pierced the secrecy of the plan, and then realization crashed down on him like a tidal wave. His eyes narrowed, and he hissed out the name of the woman he had allowed to close. "Sally. Sally sold me out." The bitterness in his voice was palpable, every syllable dripping with the sting of betrayal. Jack quickly tried to temper the fire, telling him that Sally hadn't betrayed him out of malice but out of fear, that she cared for him too much to watch him ruin himself. But Billy would not hear. In his mind, Sally had stabbed him in the back, proven once again that no one in his life could be trusted when ambition was on the line. Victoria, sensing the spiral deepening, stepped in with the voice of reason. The reason had rarely been enough to sway Billy once he had fixated on a path. She told him to look beyond himself, to see the cost his actions would carry, not for him but for his children. Her words were sharp, pointed with the truth he refused to face. "Do you really want Johnny and Katie to visit their father in prison? Do you want them to grow up carrying the shame of knowing you put greed over family?" She tried to remind him of who he once was, of the man who had fought for his children even when everything else crumbled around him. But Billy's eyes burned with defiance, his face contorted with the fury of a man convinced the world had always conspired against him. He dismissed her words as another attempt to control him, another plea for him to play the role of the family man when destiny was calling him to something greater. Then, as if summoned by the madness itself, Billy's phone rang. Kane's name lit up the screen, and in that instant, Billy's face lit with vindication. He turned to Jack and Victoria, his voice cold and triumphant, ordering them to leave. He needed no witnesses to his ascent, no interruptions to the moment he believed would finally secure his place at the top. As the door closed behind them, he lifted the phone to his ear, his voice eager, trembling with anticipation. "When do we start, Kane? When does this plan finally become reality?" But the voice on the other end was not the jubilant affirmation he had expected. Kane's tone was clipped, calculating, and merciless. "The plan has changed, Billy. You've stirred up too much trouble, too much conflict. The deal is off." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, Billy could not comprehend them, could not accept that after all the waiting, all the scheming, the future he had built in his mind was dissolving into nothing. His grip on the phone tightened, his voice cracked as he demanded answers, begged for reconsideration, but Kane was already gone, severing the line with the kind of finality that left no room for negotiation. Billy stood alone in his living room, the drink still in his hand, the silence pressing in until it roared in his ears. The dream had collapsed, the victory had slipped away, and all that remained was the echo of his own delusion. Upstairs, the children's rooms were dark, silent, a stark reminder of what Victoria had said, and yet Billy's pride, his fury, would not let him admit the truth. Instead, he poured another drink, muttering to himself that this was only a setback, that he would find another way, that no one, either Kane, nor Jack, nor Victoria, nor Sally, would keep him from the top. But in the quiet corners of his heart, a seed of doubt had taken root, and though he would not speak it aloud, he knew that the path ahead was no longer his to control.